Like I think that Enrique Pineda Barnett in the 80s made a homemade telecine, and then they started screening in his workshops, and it was sort of forgotten until 2000, the early 2000s, when Luisa Marisi, one of the curators of the group of scholars that are working with us, she sent that suggested that film for the curator of the kinetic show at the Reina Sofia in Spain, and then they decided to do the transfer 35 transfer to digital, and that's the one. From that transfer, we end up having this digital file that we're screening tonight. And
I suppose also in the context of this program, the Cosmorama is also important in that it sort of makes explicit this connection that we talk about in the program notes between kinetic art and concrete art and the audiovisual equivalent, an experimental film that sort of looks at abstraction and pure color and shape and form and movement.
Right, and there's a sort of a archival myth surrounding Cosmorama that nobody knows if it's true or not. That there was when they were looking for the print in the archives, Enrique Pineda Barnett, the filmmaker, says that they actually found there was in a can that was had no labels at all, and the film was in a spaghetti package, right? And there was a documentary made about the spaghetti package and all that, but nobody knows it's actually true or not, right? It's part of the myth. And we have the final film of the night is As Without, So Within of Manuela De Laborde, that she's here with us tonight, and then she's gonna stay with us for a Q&A.
So enjoy the program, and Manuela will be back at the end to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
People have questions, comments?
Can you talk a bit about the sound?
Yeah, so the sound, it had a thing that made it hard this time, it was like that, that wasn't, that was something, but without it, so then it's a bit easier. The sound was made by my sister, Camila. This is my thesis film, obviously, by the thank yous. and Camille lives in London, so she's a bit younger than me, and she normally does electronic music, and she's a singer, and she's completely unrelated to experimental film, and but we communicate very well working. And so at first, we made conceptual interpretations of what was a finite event, and what it did to have a finite event, and was texture in time something, when would it be narrative, when not, and we would just play around it. And because they're objects that I made, they were and because it just ended up looking like some sort of sci-fi thing, it was very hard to think of the sound, because drones took it someplace, and other things another place. If you had instruments, they are objects themselves, and they fought with each other quite weirdly, and very electronic sound as well. Maybe other people feel different, but I feel some of the things that make films kind of feel older, quicker, is sometimes the sound. There are a lot of abstract films that you can pinpoint to a time, I feel, much more, or maybe it's because we know that 16, or I don't know, you can feel the jazzy vibe in one, and so it was difficult, and we did it separately through Skype and so on, and then until it came to a moment that it was impossible if I was hearing the same shh that she was. And then we got together and we worked, but she put something in the film that I would have never. I think she adds a bit of humor to the film. Maybe I would have had a hard time to be lighter or a degree of distance. So when she just suddenly put that pluk pluk pluk, it's like, what? and then I really liked it. So in that sense, I think it works. But yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the objects that you're filming? Are you also a sculptor, or are you making objects, imagining lighting them from different angles?
So I come from fine art. My BA, like my studies before, were art and film. It was a bit of a. I don't think I really knew what I was getting into, and I hadn't really seen experimental films before. Like the first film I saw was Betsy's Voluptuous Leap on the first day of, class.
Bromberg.
Yeah, and I've always worked abstract and kind of minimal. But what I find bogus about film is that I couldn't tell which elements animated what. Like if it was your mind and your perception, or the rhythm, or the song, or the colors, and so then these sculptures are like, I would make drawings about, I'm like, do sharp things always get edited in a sharpie quickie way? Like, how do we respond to abstraction and act upon it? And then made drawings, and then the drawings were blueprints for things I made with. I use condoms and plaster, so they're like these size objects, and then I dip them in watercolor. So when you see them, they're very fragile, and they're very like toy-ish and small. And then Anya wasn't gonna move them. Anya wasn't gonna move the camera. Anya wasn't gonna move the light, because that complicated things, and I really wanted to know. And so, in principle, I was gonna look at all of them very long time. But then I was like, well, if nothing happens, I can just film a little bit and loop, because then I can economize on film. So the original footage it's like 4 minutes long, and then I went through a whole process. But black backdrop for the cinema, one single light, and then suddenly they look very. This thing about scale happens, but in reality they're more or less my hand. And I thought about sculpturing versus like chiseling and controlling, like molding versus sharp or cracking and things like this.
Can you talk about the grain?
I love it.
Generations.
Yeah, because I took so many bad, good decisions in the process, so I wanted to use the optical printer, and I had shot a little bit, and then I did tests, and I got an SD scan with a time code, like the first one, and then I suppose I just kind of lost control of the rules and the things I was meant to do or not in the digital editing, and I edited a lot, and then I was doing tests in the OP, and then the generation, somehow I like distortion and so on, but with the optical printer it seems as if it was just in that generation jump with that material, they collapsed quite a lot. So then that got ruled out, and then what I did was get a 2K scan, and I think that gave me like this, when you zoom in a lot, these kind of RGB bizarre ones, and that allowed me to do a bunch more. And then the return was using John Hawke's technique of like shooting off a monitor back into 16. it's very weird because it's a film about film that in the process just decides to do whatever a little bit. But I really wanted to finish on film because I wanted to know the entire process, and I wanted to end up with an object. So then goes a second layer. So it's hard to tell some parts. There's the first one, then there's the first one which is looped quite tightly, and then there's the second one on top.
So you recently screened it in Video Brasil, 3 loopers, or was it
just one?
One looper.
Yeah, but it doesn't work. It's a cinema piece.
Theatrical
Yeah. I wanted to because I was coming from the arts and it was a chance to see how it worked, but it's very pretty as an installation, and with the looper it just became all about the machine and the looper and so it was very kind of and you just see parts, and I think I don't know how it works for people, but I really took decisions thinking of the cinema. I was like, if we can't move, they can't move. If there's black around us, they should have black around us, because I was thinking maybe what constructed the sense of empathy with something that might be abstract. Is it recognizing it to familiar images, and I think the theater allows you to have that, and in Video Brazil was a super nice experience, but I think when you do one project, then it's, but yeah.
From the beginning you conceived it as a theatrical experience.
Sí. Mm-hmm.
Is your desire to have it end up as a physical object, you said like the film, connect to the physical objects that you're filming? Like, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like some people are more inclined, like I will print always if I need to read, and I like finishing projects in books, and even this, like there are some edits that are meant to only exist over the light table, and even if they're uncomfortable projecting, because I thought, although I didn't A/B roll myself, I was kind of fantasizing and thinking perhaps there are films that people related in this way. I think it's a weird way between overthinking and making stories and going by them about a tradition that you're just jumping into or something, and not actually doing them yourself, but being like, oh, okay, like you see it, so because what drives the decisions that you make, no? But yeah, so for me it was very important, the object. Like in some edits, they become one stone, a half that goes in this way and things like this.
In the program notes, we sort of positioned you in relationship, or we positioned this film at least in relationship to kinetic art and concrete art. And if you go to the Getty Center now, there's this show of concrete art from the Cisneros collection. And I guess maybe it's too late, but you feel, since these are sculptures, abstract sculptures that you filmed, do you feel some connection to that tradition of abstraction, or?
Like a love and hate, maybe a little bit. It's like, yeah, I get that a lot with the kind of visual, abstracted music work, And the sculptures, the kinetic ones, were the same. It's like op art was the same. I like the material minimal aspect about it, but I don't like the possessive, always changing thing that does with the viewer of. It's not that they want to entertain you, no, like, but you know, like a sculpture, something really nice about it is that you can move around it and so on, and it's moving, and I think it always tries to be greater than it is, you know, but I think it was a moment that it was important, and it talks more about a person being in a space, relating to these things and playing. I think I like the playful aspect of it. So the documentations, it can be very interesting, you know. Like Brancusi's documentations of his sculptures take it on another level, but then he also invites dancers, and I never really understood this fixation about putting dancers in sculptures. They makes the sculptures look less, but for some reason these are things that I think they insist on it because they're still trying to figure it out and see why, no, like, and this idea of the object being somehow alive for you and animated because you are wiggling with your hands, and then you being totally unable to share that with somebody else, so you put it in a rotating machinery or something, or with lights around it. Is, I think it's a sincere moment because it talks of the artist, but then as the thing itself, sometimes it's I wouldn't know what the word is, but it kind of cringes me out a little bit. So that's, and with really modern work as well, sometimes it's a problem. Like, I had a lot of problems with this film when I was making it, because I was like, why is it looking like this? Why is it being like this? I kind of normally hate these kind of things. But then it's like, there's a reason, no? Like, you're still trying to solve it. So it's a love and hate. Like, I have to look at them much more than I wish, and then, if that makes sense. It's a generation as well, I think, because Manuel's film, I really enjoyed it, but then the titles were part of it as well, you know, like as a thing.
So, and when you said that the first films that you were watching were Betsy Bromberg's.
La primera, the first one.
And then through the process, and this took you like 2-3 years during the process.
Mm-hmm.
What else was being part of your? What other filmmakers you were starting to feel
I
close
think
to, or started to like move away from other filmmakers? What was going on during it?
It was very interesting because James was a strong influence in the
Benning.
school. James Benning, and he works completely different. Like, I even told him, I was like, James, I'm sorry, you're not one of my mentees. And he's like, why not? And I was like, well, because it's an abstract film, on film. I don't think you want to be my mentor. Like, you're going to be very bored. And he was like, no, I want to. So his work is completely different, but I think a lot of the things that he said about observation and acting, it kind of influenced me. And then, what other ones? I used to know this by heart. And of the abstract ones, Walter Ruttmann's Opus, I typed everything that happens in that film for a class. That was my history paper. So I put red goes up, down, blue triangle moves, and that exercise revealed a lot about this weird reframing of a same image throughout the project that maybe you have in abstract film to economize on the material. You know, maybe if something was very hard to do, like animation, like I could see that he had changed filters and it was the same, and it was a mix of compositions. So I think for me, that was very influential on this one as well. But
Any other questions, comments?
Just curious for the curators, does anyone know anything about the making of Manuela De Laborde? It seemed like he mentions the vibration of the hand, but it looks almost like he has his camera bolted to an electric sander or something. It's amazing. Anyone know anything about how that was done?
I really don't know much about the process. Jesse, do you know? That's like besides.
Process. It's handheld camera.
Always.
A lot of his work is handheld and very rapidly edited. He's not somebody that's very well known in the United States or in Mexico for that matter. But in France, he's considered like a major figure of the avant-garde, and he made over 200 something films that are now with the Pompidou Center, which has his archive.
I've never seen him holding work. It's amazing.
I think maybe he's like under cranking. It's like the film's running slow, so each, if the aperture is open longer, he has like more.
Like shooting at a
time
sixth
for-
of a second with the aperture open.
Something
to sixth
like
of a
that,
second
yeah.
or something like that. Yeah.
But it's all, all of his work is pretty simple in terms of, it's a Super 8 camera, not a particularly fancy one.
Is the work of any of his other work available here, or you got to go to the company center?
And
It's online. Some of his films and
Like little
but it's-
fragments of
yeah,
things.
that is, yeah, fragments of it.
But he's somebody that left Mexico when he was very young, and pretty much his entire professional trajectory is in France, in
And
exile.
films are distributed
No, not in the States.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Manuela.
super.
Thank you.
Thank you.